How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and this is my channel PSReady that's all about PlayStation. I hope you had a great weekend playing Helldivers 2. This is the sleeper hit that I've been dreaming it would be. You've heard me talk about it for months here on the channel and how much I love the first game, so to see it pop off in the way it did is absolutely phenomenal. In today's video, we're going to be covering the huge leak around the PlayStation 6, how there's a pretty big downgrade for one of PlayStation 5's biggest new exclusives, and then we're going to talk about Helldivers 2. Before we jump into it all, we've actually made some progress on the amount of people who regularly watch this channel but aren't subscribed. Last time I talked about it, it was at like 90%, and now we're all the way down to like 84%. So if you keep subscribing, if you like this channel, that would be awesome. And if you want to be extra helpful, set your notifications to all and make sure they're not just set to personalized. The first thing I want to talk about is the PlayStation 6. There was a pretty big leak that came out over the weekend that didn't really get into specs, which makes me happy because as far as numbers go, I don't really care. I care about the actual console at the end of the day and how it's actually running the games, not so much what it theoretically can do in terms of like teraflops and CCUs and just raw numbers, because as we've seen more recently, raw numbers doesn't really mean a whole lot when it comes to performance in games. So the first thing I want to cover from this leak is that Sony is no longer shopping around for a chip manufacturer. Usually you would just assume they just go with AMD, but this time apparently they were having meetings with Nvidia as well, and that was honestly at the time kind of exciting to me because if you compare the upscaling tech that both companies have made, AMD has FSR, which is good. It caps out at pretty good. It's never really been amazing. And then Nvidia has DLSS, which is phenomenal. I notice it more recently because with a lot of games, using DLSS will actually get you a better looking image at the end of the day than using traditional anti-aliasing running at native resolution. Like, it really is that good. And if your PC is powerful enough to run games at native resolution, there's AI-based anti-aliasing that DLSS comes with now called DLAA, and that looks incredible. Like, it's phenomenal across the board, whereas what you get from AMD kind of feels like the budget version of all of that stuff I've been talking about. So yeah, I was really into the idea of the next PlayStation being able to take advantage of DLSS versus FSR, and it would make a lot of sense for Sony to go with Nvidia, because if they use Nvidia for their chip, they can also use FSR in games that don't want to support DLSS, but then in games that don't look good with FSR, they could just stick with the default DLSS option. It turns out though, they're not doing that. They've signed with AMD. They've said, hey, we're looking at working with AMD on this thing. We're going to get the chip as good as it can be. And the biggest reason for that is Sony really seems to be making their own upscaling technology for the next generation. And as we get into the next news story in a few minutes, where we're going to be talking about a game that's using FSR really heavily, I think it's good that Sony's working on their own upscaling methods, because going back to the PS4 generation, specifically with the PlayStation 4 Pro, when games like Horizon Zero Dawn came out and they used checkerboard upscaling to get the game running at like 1080p internally and then upscale it to 4K, it looked really good. And to my eye, at least back then, the upscaling technology looked better than it does now using FSR. So really we are getting what I initially wanted, which is a new upscaling solution in the next generation of PlayStation, which is great. So the next things to cover are when it's coming and what Sony's philosophy around this hardware is going to be. As for when it's coming, we heard rumors that 2026 was the year that Sony was looking at, which honestly sounded fair to me, right? Like, you look at when the PS5 came out, it was at the end of 2020, then you skip forward around 6 years, that's about the time you would see Sony upgrading to the next generation. But the new rumor that we're hearing is that they want this to be far and away the most powerful console on the market. They don't want this weird situation that they had this generation where the PS5 was technically less powerful than the Xbox Series X. At the beginning of the generation, we saw that manifest in a weird way where PS5 games were looking and running better than Xbox games, mainly because Xbox was so late in sending out their hardware to developers. But as was predicted, as the generation has gone on, that paradigm has shifted quite a bit, and now most games that come out third-party wise do look and run better, at least by a few percent, on the Xbox Series X. The most recent example I can think of is Alan Wake 2. When you're on PC or on PS5, that game does not run very well at all. There's stuttering, there's traversal stutter, there's frame drops into the high 40s, even in performance mode, so that's not a great situation. But over on the Xbox Series X, it's a pretty much locked 60 frames per second across the board. Now, I don't think the PS5 being a little bit inferior hardware-wise is really to blame there, mainly because Remedy was an Xbox exclusive developer for a long time. Like, the original Alan Wake was a 360 exclusive. Quantum Break was a Xbox One exclusive for a long time before it came to PC. And then you have games like Control that do look and run better on the Xbox as well. It's clear that they have experience there when it comes to developing for Xbox that they were able to take into the development of Alan Wake 2, and they're still kind of making their way through the learning process when it comes to the PlayStation 5. But still, knowing that overhead does help, as we've seen in so many games this gen, I'm excited to know that Sony really wants their console to be the most powerful machine. And because of that, it seems like they're actually pushing the release date farther out to 2028, which honestly sounds pretty cool, right? Like, I want the PS5 to last longer, mainly because we have a very similar generation here to the PS3, where that thing came out. It was a great console on paper and in practice, but we weren't having a lot of games that were specifically made to take advantage of it at launch. We were getting ports of PlayStation 2 games, we were getting ports of Xbox 360 games that didn't work out very well, and then as we got into the end of the generation, that's where developers really hit their stride with the PS3, and we started getting games like, I don't know, The Last of Us, Uncharted 3, Infamous 2, the list goes on and on of great PlayStation 3 games, and all of them were kind of situated towards the tail end of the I thought I could beat that sneeze. All of them were kind of situated towards the tail end of that generation. And then things were even worse, I'd say, with this generation, the PS5 and Series X generation, where all we've really been getting this entire generation are games that were either in development for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and then were converted to PS5 games and just didn't release on the older consoles. Games like Horizon Forbidden West, for example, that game was famously in development for a very long time on the PlayStation 4. I would guess Demon's Souls is another example of that. Returnal and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, I don't think could have ever come out on the PS4 because the PS4 had a hard drive and not an SSD, and both of those games utilized the SSD very well. But there were so many games, like all the third-party games that ended up being next gen, a lot of them ended up getting ports back to PS4, like Resident Evil 4 Remake, for example, and then now we're seeing that with Jedi Survivor as well. So the vast majority of games that have come out this generation have been on PlayStation 4 as well. So I want to see Sony take advantage of the $500 console that I bought in 2020, and they're finally doing that, right? Like Helldivers 2 is a great example, Final Fantasy 16, Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, Dead Space. There's a lot of games that are going to be next gen exclusive because they take advantage of the hardware that the console currently has. And we do know that Sony is releasing a PS5 Pro at the end of this year, so 2026 would be kind of soon. To only have 2 years of life out of the PS5 Pro, that doesn't really seem right to me. So to know now that the goal is to hit 2028 and have the PS5 Pro last around 4 years, that sounds pretty good, and like the purchase will be worth it if you're a hardcore PlayStation gamer, which I'm assuming you are if you're watching this channel. And as far as the philosophy around this console, I think we're going to kind of see things going against the grain that we keep hearing that consoles are going to be going away. Sony is a hardware company at heart, right? Like, they love making premium hardware. You can look at it across the entire field of tech they make. And then even if you look at Nintendo, they're kind of pushing back against this as well. Like when we hear, oh, there's going to be no more consoles, you're going to be playing your games on like a USB stick that you plug into your TV and stream from. As like consumer anti-friendly as Nintendo can be with keeping their games high priced, making a lot of their games exclusive, not releasing them on other platforms, they do live in that same hardware realm that Sony lives in, where they understand that they can not only make money on their hardware, but that they don't actually have to take a loss to get people to show up, because if you make great games, people buy your console. The only reason I think I could see Xbox becoming less and less of a hardware-based platform as time goes on is that as of now, they haven't released anything that I would argue competes with what the output is over at Sony or Nintendo. Like, there are great games in the Xbox Series generation for sure, like Forza Horizon 5 is an example I always go back to of a great game, but that's the 5th game in a franchise that hasn't changed since like the 2nd game in it. It's just been the same thing over and over again with better graphics and more cars and maybe a slightly bigger map. There are some other ones, like I guess Starfield, but I don't think that hit in the way that Xbox really needed it to. They've had indie darlings like Hi-Fi Rush and Psychonauts 2, but like if you compare the exclusive output of Xbox to what you get from Sony and Nintendo, I don't think they're in the same league yet. I think they have potential to get there if they don't lose their hardware strategy before that happens, but as of now, they're not in the same league. So if you're talking about the big 3 console manufacturers, the only one I could see eventually leaving the hardware market is Xbox. So yeah, as far as the PS6 goes, I'm pretty excited about about this, right? Like 2028 feels like a good time to release it. Having their own upscaling technology to go along with the AMD chip also sounds great. And that 2028 year marker kind of lines up with what we've been hearing about the chip in the Steam Deck 2. So if Valve can get that out around the same time, I think everything's going to be peachy keen when it comes to hardware and when you're releasing it. Next up here, let's talk about this new exclusive that's kind of bumming people out for the PlayStation 5. That game is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I want to praise Square Enix here really quick though, because unlike a lot of other game makers out there, Square Enix still puts out demos for a lot of their biggest games. And just like with Final Fantasy 16, there is now a free demo that's available to play now for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And the cool thing is your progress transfers. So if you start the demo, buy the game, you'll get to keep your save, which is awesome. You guys know I've been making my way through Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I like it. I don't love it. I think it's really made for people who have a lot of nostalgia for the original Final Fantasy VII. And while I've played and experienced a lot of the media surrounding the original game, and I've watched a playthrough on YouTube, I just don't like turn-based combat, and playing JRPGs is not my thing. So I've never really completed the original Final Fantasy VII, and playing the remake, it's very padded. You can tell that there's just a lot of padding when you're like doing objectives that are run across this scaffolding, hold triangle on this lever, run all the way back, do the same thing, run all the way back, do that. And there's a few battles in between. There's not a lot of big overarching plot. That looks like it's going to change in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. There's a lot of stuff going on with Sephiroth. They're moving to an open world design. They're adding traversal. Most of the content in the game is optional. And if you want to stick with the story, you can as well, but it's going to be a very overarching plot that has a lot of big moments. So if you want to save the side stuff, you can do it later. So for me, it's worth pushing through this game that I'm not absolutely loving because of the changes that are coming to the sequel. But one big negative change that's coming from the fact that the sequel is going to be an open world game is that it's taking a major graphical hit. As far as those negatives go, the textures are very muddy. They're running very low resolution. The performance mode runs the game at sub 1080p. So that looks pretty not great when you're running through the world and you're seeing really low res textures. The shadows load in and pop in very close to you, which makes it feel kind of budget. And just overall, the lighting seems to have gotten a pretty major downgrade. But the trade-off there that I don't see a lot of places talking about is that unlike Final Fantasy 16 and plenty of other games that we've gotten in the past year that have performance modes, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth runs at a fairly locked 60 frames per second in its performance mode. And in its quality mode, it runs at an upscaled 4K. So like 1440p internal all the way up to 4K. And while yes, there is a noticeable downgrade from the original game, the gameplay advancement they've made, which is what I ultimately care about, I think totally justifies the degrade, the downscale in graphics overall. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll take worse graphics if I get more playability out of the game beyond being able to run from cutscene to cutscene with a few battles in between. And when it comes to the cutscenes, Square Enix has always been like widely regarded as one of the best cutscene makers in the industry, and that has definitely not changed with Rebirth. I think that's an area where they've definitely increased the graphics for this game. Like the cutscenes and some of the demos moments look absolutely phenomenal, and all of the trailers, like the ones I use as B-roll when I talk about this game, those look absolutely phenomenal as well. So while it is a bummer that if you play in the performance mode, it can look like it's sub 1080p at times, I think they're doing a good job here giving both type of person what they want. Like the performance mode performs extremely well. Yes, you do take a hit in resolution, but you get a lock 60 in return for that. And then if you want to play the game at a higher resolution and get maximum graphics, you can play at 30 FPS and it'll look really good and stay locked at 30. Now that brings us to the third topic of today's video, which is Helldivers 2. I'm going to split this off into two stories here. The first one is going to be just surrounding the entire launch process and whether or not Sony was smart to release this game day and date on PC and PS5. And then the second one is going to be my review. I think people are just less interested in that, so I'm saving it for the end. But long story short, I put 20 hours into this game since it released on Thursday, and I am nowhere near slowing down. I'm going to put so many more hours into this game. I absolutely love it, and I think it's one of PlayStation's best releases in a very long time. But let's start out with the launch weekend. I got to be honest, it was a little bit rocky, but for the best reasons. It really came down to the fact that too many people bought the game, right? Like Sony didn't expect 1 million people to show up on the launch weekend and play this game. And because of that, the servers that Arrowhead was using were just not equipped for the sheer amount of people that wanted to play this game over the weekend. So I'm sure you saw the news story that it beat Sony's record on Steam for concurrent players. Before, it was God of War at around like 100,000 people, I want to say. This game cleared past that very quickly quickly and ended up getting around 200,000 people playing at the same time just on PC. And from the data we got from the CEO of Arrowhead, it looks like the exact same amount of people ended up playing on PS5 at the same time. So they were not ready for 500,000 people to log into this game all at once. I got to give them credit though. They were very quick to fix the servers, and they also had a lot of pay to win criticism thrown at them for this game. And that quickly went away as well, because while yes, it does have a premium battle pass, this game is extremely generous with giving away the premium currency. In the actual maps, when you're playing the game, you can find these like gold beacons that have little like drop pods that have upgrades in them. You'll either find the level up currency, which is called war bonds, or just regular credits, or you can find super credits, which are the premium currency. It costs around 1,000 super credits to buy the battle pass, and I cleared past that in around 5 hours of just general play. So while I was still working my way through the like 8-page battle pass that comes free with the game, the paid battle pass, which only has 3 pages of actual unlocks, I was able to get the amount of currency I needed to buy that before I was even halfway through the original battle pass. So if they're going to do this release schedule with these battle passes, where they do a free one at the same time as a paid one, I don't think you'll ever have the situation where you have to pay for the premium battle pass, but it's a situation where I probably just will because of how generous they are with the currency. It makes me want to give them money because it's like, thank you for not treating me like shit for buying your game. And the coolest thing about the battle pass and all these like pay to win accusations is that the weapons you get in the premium battle pass are about as good or even worse than the ones you get in the free battle pass. You get way more weapons from the free battle pass, and then the paid one only gives you a few. And the only one you could consider being a true premium weapon is the revolver, but not because it's actually good in the battlefield. It's just cool to use because when you switch to it, your guy flips it around his finger, right? Like it's a 6-shot revolver that takes a long time to reload, so you stop using it very quickly when you unlock some of the free weapons. So on the one hand of criticism, the servers, they fixed that within a couple of hours. They're still having issues with crossplay. Like it works sometimes, it doesn't work others, but I will say I played around 10 hours on Saturday with my friend George on PC, and then my friend Nick was over on the PlayStation 5, and we just invited him privately to our game, and it worked flawlessly. So I think the crossplay only breaks down when you do quick play, but they seem to have fixed that mostly. So all of the issues have already been ironed out, which is very emblematic of how PlayStation releases games, you know, finished, and when they do have issues, they usually fix them within the first weekend or so. So we're keeping up with the record there. And so when it comes to the strategy of releasing the same time on PC as PlayStation 5, I think that was like an absolute win for Sony here. And the reasoning for that is that when you look at other releases on PC, there have definitely been successes like Horizon Forbidden West, Days Gone, and God of War, and I guess Death Stranding you could count, but they didn't publish it on PC, so it doesn't totally count. But then you look at their other games like Returnal, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and Sackboy Big Adventure. None of those games even managed to stay in the top 10 on Steam for more than just the first day that they came out, and they quickly fell off in sales thereafter. So if you look at the situation where people who have a PC, they've already invested around $2,000 into it, they don't want to spend $500 on a PlayStation 5, it's not like releasing exclusively on PS5 gets them to buy a PS5 in the first place, and then when you release on PC at the same time, when the hype is the highest and the marketing is at its most saturated, it's going to result in more sales for Sony, which ultimately helps us because that gives them more money to release games down the line. Now, I don't want to see Sony releasing games on Nintendo hardware or Xbox hardware. I never want that to happen. I want PlayStation to keep its identity of high quality games. And I feel like if you dilute the release strategy down to like 4 platforms versus just the 2 of PC and PS5, that could really cause some problems. But if you just keep it at the 2 where people are going to show up day 1, I feel like that's just a win-win all around for everybody. So as far as the launch weekend goes, I think it was an absolute success. And I think Sony should pay attention here to the fact that this is a AA game that was definitely a lower budget than what they're spending on stuff like Spider-Man 2 or The Last of Us. They need to have more games like this that they can release throughout the year in between their huge releases so that it keeps people actively playing on their PlayStation 5. But yeah, that'll cover it for today's video. My PSN name is on the screen. It's BlackHills99. If you're going to be playing Helldivers 2, feel free to invite me to some of your games. If you see me online, I have my things set to public, not private. I don't accept all the PlayStation invites I get to be friends because it slows down your PlayStation 5 if you have too many, but you can invite people that you're not friends with. Again, it's BlackHills99. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you today. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe, set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.